So many advantages to being last. You've all had a good time? Yeah. So here's how I'd like to do this. I want to do something I've been looking forward to for a very long time. All of our, as you might imagine, all of the clients that we've worked with have assigned NDAs, and Indeed was kind enough to at least support giving this talk. And so I'm going to talk at you for a bit, and then I'm going to have Jason Copy come up and also talk a little bit, and then I'm going to say something clever and wise and thought-provoking at the end. That's the plan. So, all right, I'm going to get started here. I need first, before I get started, I wanted to point something out that's maybe a little bit meta. It seems clear to me at this point. It should be definitely clear to a lot of you, I don't know everyone, that organizations that are software reliant, critically dependent, have been thinking differently. And it's been happening for a while. It's still the beginning, but these sort of topics that we've talked about with lots of speakers and with all of you in the hallways and through meals, these are not topics that showed up in the 80s, right? The fact that this conference exists and redeployed before it is even more evidence that change is afoot. So you all and your interest is about that, and it's really easy to lose sight because a conference is a conference is a conference is a conference, and and then there's somebody's got some slide transitions, and Courtney's using Prezi, and there's a booth, and there's meetups and that sort of thing. It's the substance of what we're talking about that's important. So, little bit of backstory. This is the why should you pay any attention to what I say, what makes Adaptive Capacity Labs credible. I have to say that even though this talk is about specifically working with Indeed and our observations, mine and Richard's observations as an independent party working with this organization, it's mostly because they were cool with it. It's not because any other clients. Right? We've worked with some amazing incident analysts. Some of them are even in the room. Can't tell you who they are, though. We've seen so much. It is very difficult to describe. After I left Etsy, we founded this, or really, Dave and Richard called me up, and I said, yeah, of course. And since then, we've worked with, really, I think it was like 150 person company to 490,000 person company in all shapes and sizes. B2C, B2B, infrastructure, non-infrastructure, healthcare, all sorts of enterprise-ish and completely enterprise, and internet native, and all of the mix in between. This little bit here is that we don't do theory. You're not going to get theory from us. You're not going to get theory from me today. We are paid to do work that's practical and hands-on. We know theory. Happy to talk with you about our clients out of band from the project. We'll talk about it all day. But we don't say that here's interviewing for incident analysis. No, let's talk about the history of cognitive task analysis and where the critical decision method comes in and knowledge elicitation, and let's get through about a week of that and then we'll start. We don't do any of that. We work in the messy details. So I am incredibly lucky, and not all of the reactions that we've had with our clients have been as wow, that's amazing vibes as we have with Indeed. So here's the what of this talk. This is an exemplar case of meaningful and concrete progress made in learning effectively from incidents. By the way, that's what this conference is about. This is not an incident analysis conference, if you may have noticed. That's an important distinction. Learning from incidents is the reason you do this. This is a story about some of what they were able to accomplish. This is some of how they were able to do it. Okay, so a little bit about exemplars. I understand that you probably know what the word means. Brent Feiberg, in an excellent paper called Five Myths about, or Misunderstandings about Case Study Research, pointed out that exemplars, actually he said the Kuhnian, as in the Thomas Kuhn who came up with paradigm shift and scientific revolutions, said this: a scientific discipline without a large number of thoroughly executed case studies is a discipline without systematic production of exemplars, and that a discipline without exemplars is an ineffective one. Now, we're used to this. We work with exemplars all the time. We may not use that word. We've made use of them before. This is this was easy for me because that's me on the right, and that's my friend Paul on the left. And we gave this talk at Velocity in 2009. Here's some of the messy notes on Paul's living room table a couple days before when we were putting it together. And I came upon this. I figured you'd probably want to see what this says, which is, this is what works for us. It may not work for you. We don't have enough time to go into how Indeed did this. For that, you'd have to hire us. I mean, you'd have to have a much more longer time. It may not work for you, but exemplars exist not because they are procedures, but it's because they have a different power. Some parts might. So here are some hopefully obvious statements. An absence of incidents is not evidence that learning is happening. Just because you're not having incidents doesn't mean, oh, it must be, we're amazing at learning. The presence of incidents is not evidence that learning is not happening. We're having incidents. Oh, it must mean we're terrible at learning. None of that is true on any face. Pretty clear, right, on that? So when it comes to incident analysis and learning, learning means, well, learning. And as Dave Woods pointed out earlier in his talk yesterday, there's all kinds of different frames of learning, and there's no way I'm going to get that. But a few things that learning anything requires is exposure to the thing. Once you're exposed to a thing, you're contextualizing or recontextualizing that thing in other things and reconceptualizing them, reintegrating them throughout this sort of messy sort of thing that's going on, and remembering. Sometimes in there, you may find patterns at various levels. When it comes to learning from incidents and via incident analysis, and the way I'm meaning it is, there are a couple of things that are different and often not talked about. Some bits that were pointed out in the redeploy panel that Perman spoke about earlier. First is that people learn different things from incidents. There is no, here is the canonical set of lessons. That is not a thing. People will learn different things from incidents, primarily because they learn in different ways at different times asynchronously. They will often learn things completely unrelated to the incident or what others learn. We cannot control what is learned. As incident analysts, as leaders in the company, as peers, we cannot control what is learned. We can create conditions and situations where people have opportunities to learn something new. There's no guarantee but they've got a shot at it, at learning something new or better understand something they misunderstood before. The goal of incident analysis, therefore, is to build the richest understanding of an event for the broadest possible audience. The analysts are the least important part of that audience. The least important. Let's say you've got an incident, and there's some sort of post-incident activities. You'll have a meeting, or you fill out a template, or you might interview some people. You might do all kinds of different things. We ask this question all the time: who is learning as a result of this? As a result of the post-incident activities and stuff? We ask that to leaders who call us, who want to have help. You know, can we talk with you about what you do? And we ask, and it's a very difficult question to answer. People who responded to the event, do they learn something different as a result of these post-incident activities? They were there. Do they learn something different? Or do they like, oh, I'm going to go to the meeting, so they tell the same thing exactly what happened, and I was there, and I don't need to go there. What about people who analyze the case? I mean, the answer is yes. By the time halfway done of the analysis, they actually know more about the case than any of the responders do. Why? Because they've already synthesized what a number of responders have already told them. What about people who don't either who didn't respond to the incident or analyze the incident? So on who is this learning? Who is learning? So let's say, follow me here, we have people. They're the only ones who can learn. We've got analysts, and of those, we've got analysts who worked on the case. We've got analysts, say, who didn't work on the case, but who have the skills to do the work. And we have non-analysts. What a selfish view of the world. We have, on Earth, we have analysts and non-analysts. Of those, there are people who were involved in the event, maybe people who responded to it, managers of responding teams who somehow participated. Others, customer service, for example, comes to mind. And there were people who were not involved in the event. What about people who were on the teams of people who responded but were on vacation or were asleep or for whatever reason didn't have anything to do with responding to the incident? Or managers of non-responding teams. What about people who didn't respond to it, who work at the same company, maybe in a completely different team, but who are responsible for some pretty similar tech? Oh, they over there, they had some issue with Kafka or Mongo or Memcache or whatever. We use that stuff. Oh, but I would never, it's probably not interesting. So sure, the people, like I said, the people who are responding, I think this is a gimme. Certainly there's things you could do to make it hard for both analysts and the responders to learn, but let's just say that that's the case. What about these people? And wise and modest man said a couple of minutes ago that the goal of incident analysis is to build the richest understanding of an event for the broadest possible audience. I used red for the emphasis there. Broadest possible audience being the important part. So when it comes to these signals, right, we don't control what's learned. People learn things all the time. They're probably going to learn things, and you as an analyst may have no idea. Life's not fair. Learning from incidents is situated, right? It is situated, very related to Lev and Wagner, what Perman pointed out in communities of practice. It can't be tested for like classroom education, okay? What people actually do, that is to say their behavior over time surrounding post-incident artifacts are critical signals that learning is happening. Certainly we can say that learning can't happen. People can't learn anything from a phenomenon if they have no form of exposure to it. Raise your hand if you want to mention, only a couple of you, your favorite part about that incident case that I worked on 2 weeks ago. Anybody? No? No, of course not. Because nobody here has read, seen, or heard anything about what I'm talking about. It's that basic. Exposure is what a huge portion of this talk and what progress looks like. That's the stage that we're at. It doesn't have to be any more complicated. Information is not a scarce resource. Attention is. This is Woods and Patterson and Roth summarizing, paraphrasing Herb Simon. How many here, follow me here, how many here have voluntarily subscribed to a newsletter you were not interested in? No? You were like, I don't have enough email. And what can I do? What can I do to fill this up? Has anybody here read an article you expected, and you expected to be a waste of time? You were not open to surprise, being surprised. You did?
Absolutely.
Why?
You can learn a lot from a bad book.
Yeah, so you had an expectation. So that's my saying. If you don't have an expectation that you're going to get something out of it, right? I'm talking about your expectation, and shifting that is important. We're going to get into that. So here's a team of engineers, right? This is fictitious. This isn't Indeed. We got 5 people on the team. We got 1 manager. Let's say something happens, an incident with the stuff they're responsible for, okay? 3 of the 5 people respond to the incident. 1 of them was on call. The 2 others were just around. They were ready to jump in. 1 was asleep, and say the other one was on vacation, okay? So let's zoom out and get a better picture of this fictional. This literally is fictional, actually. It's not a joke whatsoever. We see, obviously, that they're one of many teams. So now let's sort of flesh this out a little bit. Let's say that there are 3 incident analysts taking up analyzing the case. By the way, as an aside, strong guidance has been and will continue to be, people analyzing an incident should not include responders to the incident. Happy to talk about that later. Analysis also, we always say, also should be done by more than 1 person. Ideally 3 people, but more than 1 person. Indeed does. What would Indeed do? We're very much interested in what sort of attention, interest, participation, engagement of any kind happens with people who are not analysts of the case and not responders of the case. And I thought for a very long time, non-analysts and non-responders. Listen, Richard was in charge of naming. I'm not very good at it, and I'm happy to take patches, but I can't come up with anything better than nanner, non-analyst, non-responder. But people who were not part of the incident or analyze it went to a group review meeting. We would say that that's pretty damn great, right? This is a step in the right direction. The broadest possible audience. Let's say more people read the case write-up. Let's say that people who read the case write-up weren't even at the company. Let's take it one further. I don't even have this on the slide. What if you, and we have seen this, what if you've written code, and in that code, to explain what you're doing, in the code comment, you provide a link to a write-up of an incident that happened 2 years before you worked there? That's what broadest possible audience looks like. So these indicators of what I've been calling nanner behavior, I've got a couple of representations of that. So this is, what I'm showing you is attendance at a group review meeting, right? And I've typical, quite typical at Indeed. This is Indeed. So the circles here represent the number of folks who attended it, and sort of roughly what part of the organization that they came from. So here you see, so there's 28 people who were responders. Mostly they were responders and analysts, right? That's a big room, right? Let me show you what the nanners look like. So these are people who went out of their way. There was nothing mandatory about going to this meeting. I don't know anything about that part of the organization, and in your organization there might be some, it might not be officially mandatory, but certainly you might have some like social credibility for being seen there. I can tell you this, you can't really fake genuine enthusiasm and participation. So you can't really can't really fake it. This is amazing. This is not common. Raise your hand when you have people from marketing coming to your group review meetings. Whatever you do, for those of you who have your hands up, figure out what's bringing them there. The amount of active interest in the newsletters that their LFI team, this is like 5 months. 5 months, internal newsletter is a very big deal. Something even more amazing is where these subscriptions for their internal newsletters coming from. So we've got these 3 engineering orgs. Fine, engineers, you'd figure, oh, learning from Incident's newsletter, oh yeah, it's all nerdy and a bit SRE-ish, and so let's, of course. But there are people from customer service, finance, sales, marketing, legal, HR. Is it all of those organizations? No, but I can tell you it's probably more than yours. More than many, anyway. So what does this mean? This means a couple things. One, the newsletter is written for a much broader audience than just software engineers. That's number one, and that takes effort. Number two is that people outside of engineering find it compelling enough to subscribe at work. You've heard and you may have seen blog posts that we've written about the table stakes, which is, are people reading the write-ups? What I've done is I've kind of split, this is from January, and I've split out from analysts, which you kind of get to say, like, I mean, we'll be hard on ourselves, like, if we just don't count them, because they're probably reading older cases and older write-ups to refresh their memory, because they see a theme that is that may look familiar. There's maybe some details, but also they're writing them. Although these are just views and not edits. But the orange represent nanners. I didn't have time to indicate via tenure those that started, because because I'm not very good. And then there are responders. I'm shareable with computers. They also do they do surveys, and there's a couple of questions. What's fascinating to me is when they ask questions like these at after people attend a group review meeting. I felt this event review meeting was worth the time I spent attending. And again, these are all, it's a survey. You don't have to fill it out. And people fill it out. The fact that people fill it out is amazing. The fact that people fill it out with these answers are amazing. I am this likely to read the incident write-up after attending this event review. This is a very, very big deal. There's so much that I could put in here, and there's so much that they do. We've worked with them a number of times, and handling tricky, tough situations or really complicated mechanisms in some of the cases that they've analyzed. Interviewing in and of itself is just just very good. And Richard and I have said to them as much. Very high level, how are you able to do this? How is Indeed able to do this? And then I'll hand it over to Jason to say a few words. They first they committed to building the skills necessary. They knew that this was skill. They knew that this was stuff that they didn't know how to do, and this is a thing we're going to get better at. And I just wanted to mention something that Richard had pointed out, which I fully agree with. You do not learn how to ice skate by reading a book about ice skating. You ice skate. There's a whole lot that goes in. This is like a graphic that I had to like pare down so it didn't distract everybody while I'm talking. There's a much more fleshed out sort of version of what these skills, what expertise looks like. But practically speaking, it's interviewing for incident analysis, which is entirely terrible when it comes to, and engineers are awful in their gut at this, the worst of all. And it's not a joke. The instincts we have as engineers is to do many things that are absolutely counter to interviewing in incident analysis. And no, you can't read a paragraph to do it. They're very good because they review and critique their own interview recordings when they can record them. And their peers, they ask their peers for critique as well. Group meeting facilitation is about as close to, watching Gary Klein at his critical decision-making workshop that I've seen. Generating and synthesizing themes, narrative composition and graphic representation. They demonstrated what different looks like, at least enough to garner attention. It was already on a backdrop. Indeed's been around for a long time. It's been on a backdrop. It's not like they had nothing and then they had been doing, and there's all sorts of distant, and many of the companies that you represent and work at have like, oh, there was this time when we had a new template, and there was this time we did this new thing, and somebody was really Jira happy and did this thing, and they had tried different things. They needed to demonstrate what different looked like, because otherwise it wouldn't have shifted expectations. This shift of expectations, and that's not just reading them, but also participating and being enthusiastic and looking forward to. People come to the LFI team at Indeed asking them, requesting, can you do this case for us? They have to turn some down. They are in demand because they're good. Quick aside, the reason for this, the reason what's typical is that there's this common, very cycle of decreasing value, right? People don't read them because they're terrible. And why are they terrible? Because people don't put a lot of effort into them. People don't put a lot of effort into them because they don't think anybody's going to get anything out of it. But here's the clicker. Indeed, well, sorry, I had to point this up. This is the topic in the Adaptive Capacity Labs general channel. And I still believe that to this day. In the LFI team that Indeed made this circle go the other way. And they don't stop there. They could then keep building momentum and adapt as they went, coming up with ideas that Richard and I had never even thought of, and thought, I wish we thought of that. Along the way, and most importantly, anticipating any new barriers that might arise which could threaten that momentum. Good analysis is not about capturing what you, the analyst, find interesting or important. Zero. This is not about you. It's not for you. You are not the one who has the answers. It's about discovering, exploring, and representing what others found to be interesting, important, unclear. You make the write-up compelling and people want to read it because it's the story that they have already told you. This is what the LFI team at Indeed excels at, and it's just absolutely bananas. Jason. I'll go over here.
Sounds good. Hey, everybody. I'm Jason Copy. I lead SRE at Indeed. I've been at Indeed for a little over 14 years. When John and I were talking about the conditions for the LFI team at Indeed and what's allowed us to accomplish all of this, how do I go to the next slide? This one.
The green.
Okay.
Yep.
The thing that came to mind was initiative and patient long-term progress. Perman mentioned earlier that it takes a long time. Dave mentioned yesterday that it's hard work. Back in 2019, Alex Ellman, who spoke yesterday with Sarah Butt, started talking internally about resilience engineering topics and LFI, the Swiss cheese model, things like that, presented them to the SRE organization, and really started to seed the idea that maybe something could be different. Alex also presented publicly that year about that topic. At that time, I think we just had one LFI advocate. Alex was also kind of thinking, hey, maybe we should have a team of people that did this LFI work. But it wasn't until later in 2020 that there became a second LFI advocate. So in 2020, Alex and I started talking with John and Richard about engaging with adaptive capacity labs. Alex learned about Jelly before Jelly was announced and was able to get into a design partnership with them. And this was actually a little bit confusing to me, this whole Jelly platform. I knew of Nora being the chaos person. And so I was like, why is she doing incident analysis? I don't understand. Like, chaos was the thing that she was doing. And then I thought, John was known for DevOps, but why is he doing incident analysis? I was actually just confused. And so I wasn't yet an advocate at this point. We proceeded to go into the design partnership with Jelly and Alex. I was managing Alex at the time. And he said, hey, I'm going to be out of town, or I'm on PTO next week. Can you work with Nora and Laura to help them launch this design partnership? And I was like, OK, yeah, fine. And so I meet with Laura and Nora, and I just couldn't get this out of my head. Like, why incident analysis? And so I started listening to some talks. I listened to Dr. Laura McGuire's talk from Redeploy. I listened to, I think it was Ronnie Chen's talk on deep underwater team diving from Redeploy. And after listening to those talks for me, and this is my story, I started to have an epiphany. I started to realize that learning from incidents was actually much more than just the incidents themselves. And I'm somebody who, one of my hobbies is rock climbing. And so when Laura was talking about this mission of getting to the summit and variables changing and needed to change the plan and needing to work with a team to change the plan, it all started to kind of click for me. Because in my experience, one of the things that I did to learn about rock climbing is I read the accident report from American Alpine Club every year, and I listen to the Sharp End podcast, which tells stories, brings survivors of climbing accidents onto the podcast to be interviewed and talk about what led up to the situation, how things were going, and what they've learned from it. So for me, in a very unplanned way, I realized that there was something a lot bigger than the incidents themselves. And at that point, the company transitioned into having 2 advocates, which it turns out to be really valuable to work with other people. And so we worked on a budget proposal to create a dedicated LFI team to get the Jelly platform. We didn't actually get all of the headcount that we originally requested. I think we requested 3 full-time analysts, a manager, and a program manager. And I think we got 1, but we'll take it. So we also got clearance to have ACL come on board and do a training a couple months later. There was another perspective shift for me during the ACL training, because I did the training with the rest of the team. And I'm the head of S3. I have, at this point, about 90 people in my org. My job is to talk to people all day, to meet with them one-on-one, and understand what's going on for them and help them work through that. And I did this training, and I was completely exhausted at the end of the week. I was so stunned at how hard this different work was that it really, for me, catalyzed that we really needed this to be a full-time position, and we really needed a big team. And in 2021, we were able to hire our first external incident analyst and also have a couple of internal transfers. And then last year, we were able to grow the team to 7 dedicated full-time incident analysts, some of which are in Tokyo, where we have a presence. And so we have analysts in that part of the world as well as here in the US. When thinking about how it's possible that we were able to do this, I talked to the LFI team, and so what you're about to see is kind of a collection of our different perspectives about what we think might be some of the conditions for the growth of LFI at Indeed. Our corporate values from the very beginning, the number one has been what's best for the job seeker, and so this kind of permeates a lot of our decisions when it comes to doing teamwork, when it comes to working across boundaries, when it comes to prioritizing how are we making decisions. Our leadership for a long time has instilled this a very supportive environment, wanting people to grow, wanting people to have space to innovate, wanting people to bring their self to work, and prioritizing creating safety for our own selves as well as for others through belonging and psychological safety. For a long time, we've been a bottoms-up company. In fact, we even had initiative as one of the dimensions of performance management for a really long time. And so there's a lot of this practice of autonomy, different parts of the business, doing what they think is best for the job seeker. LFI specifically, one of the things at this point, we introduced LFI a couple of years ago. Our product is mainly stable. We're a job search engine. People can come to the employers can come to the website and post jobs. People search for jobs. We match them together. And so we're kind of beyond the startup phase. And we do have enough employees in the company to justify the full-time LFI team. Our engineering organization is about 2,000 people, and our LFI team is 7 of those. One of the things that came out is that our employees are just happy to engage in the LFI process. Somebody mentioned earlier today that engineers are happy to tell you their story. So just asking them a question, they're happy to tell you your story. But this might be in contrast to some other organizations where people withhold information. And I think our leadership has done a really good job of trying to create an open and transparent culture that kind of fosters this. And some other things are that because we've been growing and changing constantly, there are sometimes unclear processes and boundaries. We don't have a single software development process at Indeed. Teams have their own variations. We don't even have a single incident process at Indeed. Groups vary with autonomy. There are some teams at Indeed that calculate MTTR and use that to drive their decisions. But not everybody needs to do that, and not everybody does. Because we change teams a lot, there's also expertise that's spread between different teams that sometimes get pulled back into incidents and can help spread the expertise that way. And this concept of helping others is actually built into our performance management system as well. And so I think this helps to accelerate the sense of reciprocity. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. So I know if I've been snarky earlier, it's because I'm excited. I really didn't think that what is happening would ever happen. To be fair, Paul Hammond and I didn't think that before either. And continuous deployment became a thing, I guess. It feels much more and more, and many of you maybe have heard me say this, but it feels very much like a different topic. But this shift in, it is a fucking paradigm. It's not a shift in perspective. I'm not going to soft pedal it anymore. A shift in paradigm within the software world is always uneven, comes in waves, but it's happening. It reminds me very much of the 2008, 2011-ish time frame. Your kids will see pictures of this conference. And their kids will see pictures. And you laugh, but my kids have seen pictures of the early meetings in the 80s with Dave and Richard. So I'm going to end you with this. We now have an exemplar. What if you had aspirations? What if you thought, like, it's just, is it that you're going to do the same thing? You need the exact same conditions? No, obviously not. But it's evidence, just like all qualitative data. It's evidence that it is. And it has been done. And sometimes that's all you need. I won't belabor the point about whether or not you need to get support from leadership, or the flip side, which is the man is keeping us down. I obviously subscribe to Richard's point of view, and I think, and Dave Wood's point of view. It's just that all in good time. What if you did get all the leadership support you wanted? Just a question. What would you actually do? And so the answer that I'm hoping this talk would help at least provoke some thoughts and generate discussion, even rants and raves, and I can't believe I keep going to listen to this John Allspaw talk again, because God. But Indeed has done the work to show what different looks like. They didn't just shift expectations inside the organization. I'm hoping this talk will do it outside as well. Thank you.